Hi everyone, it's Ruth. Today we're going to take a look at Gelli plate printing. Now there are so many different ways to print using a Gelli plate, and we're going to cover several of them. So feel free to pause and rewatch this video as often as you need. Now, Gelli plates are a lot of fun to work with. They're kind of a recent art supply, printmaking supply, but they're a lot of fun. You can make a homemade plate or you can purchase a Gelli plate. For this printmaking process, we're making our own plates. And all you need is that gelatin, that unflavored gelatin. Knox is like a brand that you can get at the grocery store. You usually get a box of it that has about 4 packets in it. And that works. I have a bulk because I make lots of plates. I do lots of demos, but just regular unflavored gelatin will work for making the Gelli plate, the homemade Gelli plate. So when you make it, it'll look something like this. I have a few plates here, and you can see it's just a really stiff Jello texture. And this is what we're going to be using for our printing today. In the kit that you received, it has some illustrated instructions with a step-by-step recipe on how to make this plate. Again, the only ingredients are water and the gelatin, and then you get this plate that's semi-permanent you can use for a couple weeks if we take care of it. And I'll talk more about how to clean and store the homemade plates in a little bit. But we're going to be using these plates to do our printing, and you'll be able to make so many different prints with just this one plate. If it's something that you enjoy, this Gelli printing is something that you enjoy, then it may be worth it to actually purchase a Gelli plate. And here's an example of that. They're on the pricier side, but again, if this is something that you enjoy, it's definitely worth the investment. And it's just, you can see with this plate here, I've had this one for a few years, for a while. And it's not super thick. It's about 1/2 inch thick, but it's that same texture. And it's a permanent plate. It'll last for like numerous printings. Again, for this process today, we're going to be using the homemade plates, our homemade Gelli plates. But I just wanted to kind of show an example of what the Gelli plate looks like if you were to purchase it in the store. So let's get on to our printing process. For our supplies, we'll definitely need this Gelli plate. So if you have your Gelli plate, go ahead and pull that out. We'll use that today. The next thing we need is going to be our illustrated instructions. And so typically when we use these instructions, we have one sheet that we're working with. The supplies are listed at the top, and then that process is laid out step by step. I'll be guiding us through this process, but this is basically that recipe. So again, if you enjoy this process and you want to do it again, here's a great recipe for it. The difference between what we typically do and what we're doing in this video is that we're going to be looking at 2 different instructions. We're going to start off our process today by printing with stencils and natural materials. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about printing with magazine pages and photocopies. So we'll be doing both of those today. You'll be able to make all the prints with your one Gelli plate, so you don't need extra plates for it. I'll be doing multiple Gelli plates just to kind of show examples today. So go ahead and pull out those illustrated instructions. You've got your Gelli plate. The next thing we need is going to be that brayer. And again, this is kind of the right hand, the most important tool of the printer. We're going to be using this to get our pigment onto our plate so we can do the printing. So go ahead and pull out your brayer. We'll also need our acrylic paint. Now in the kit, you have some that are in tubes kind of like this, blue, yellow, and red, but really any acrylic paint is going to work for this. These are going to be on the like runnier side, which is okay. They'll work for these couple prints that we're going to do. But when we do that magazine print, you'll want a paint that's a little thicker. And it's okay. Any kind of acrylic paint will work. It's just a little easier with that thicker pigment, right? That thicker paint. So after we get our pigment, we'll go ahead and pull out our paper. Now, if you have the kit, we're just using regular sketchbook paper, which is a really thin, smooth paper, perfect for printing because it has a really great transfer of pigment. You can use other paper. You can use coarser paper. They all work, but thinner paper typically works better. So we're going to be using that sketch paper today. next thing we need is going to be preparing our workspace. I work off a piece of foil. It just kind of helps me keep my mess contained. And you can see I've already been printing a little bit on my foil. But it's good to prepare our space, whether it's the foil, wax paper, newspapers, disposable tablecloth, tray, anything like that will help us kind of contain that space, contain that mess. We're using acrylic paint today, so it does come off pretty easily with a little soap and water, but it's always good to be on the safe side, err on the safe side, err and caution. Another thing that's really helpful to have is either an apron or clothes that you don't mind getting messy. Again, we're working with acrylic paint, which isn't typically messy, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. And then the last thing I want to mention supply-wise is going to be something to hold the paint while we roll it. And so I'll be using a piece of foil for that today. But you can use a paper plate or something like that. It doesn't have to be anything super special. So in our process today, we're going to do quite a few different prints. And we're going to start off by looking at stencils and natural materials. So I'm going to go ahead. I've got 2 plates here that I'm going to pull out. You kind of set those up. Now, with the Gelli plates, when we make our plates, we want to make sure we're making them in a flat bottom container. And the reason for that is we want a smooth surface to print on. If there is any kind of divot or indent or like curve or anything like that, it's going to print when we put our pigment on it. And so you'll see, like my plate here, when I made my plate, it kind of bubbled up on the top. And that's okay. When I pull it out of my tray, I have that flat bottom to give me that smooth surface. So if you start seeing bubbles or wrinkles or anything like that on the top, know that that's okay. We really want the bottom of that plate mostly. We want that flat part. Okay. So I'm going to use these 2 plates today and do a couple examples. We're going to start off by looking at stencils and natural materials. And so I've got a couple leaves here that I'm going to be printing. And so just to kind of talk about the best natural materials to print, leaves are really great. You can do flowers, you can do like herbs, things like that. They're all really great. The thing you want to pay attention to when you're getting natural materials is that you want the fresher, the fresher the better, basically. And it's because when it starts drying out, it gets brittle. And so there's a chance that it might break, right, and crumble in your print, and we don't want that. And so when it's a fresher leaf, it's not as fragile, and it can last a little longer. And so I've got these that I just pulled out of a plant just a moment ago. And one of the best leaves to get is one that has a lot of ridges in the back. We're not going to be printing the front part. We're going to be printing that underside. And that's because those veins and stems leave great detail. So here's an example, just a quick example of that. You can see the leaf, the bottom of the leaf had a lot of veining in here. So we get a lot of patterning and design. And so that's what we want when we're looking at natural materials. We want to feel with our fingers the ridges, and we know that that's going to be, that will make for a good print. So I have my natural materials here. The next thing I want to kind of talk about too, as we're doing this printing, is a stencil. And so for my stencil here, I'm going to go ahead and make it out of paper. If you use paper, you can get 1, maybe 2 uses out of it. You can use something like wax paper or parchment paper, and it'll last a little longer for more printing. But I'm going to go ahead and just kind of fold my paper in half and make a little stencil for myself today. I'm just going to do a little leaf. One of the great things is that it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm just doing a little design here, a leaf design. I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. But I'm just using regular sketch paper today for this one. So I'll be able to get 1, maybe 2 printings off of it. But if you want something that'll last a little longer, doing some wax paper, parchment paper is really good. If you want to make kind of a permanent stencil, you can get something like Duralar, which is a really thin plastic that you can cut into, and that'll make really great stencils also. Yeah, so I'm just kind of making my simple stencil here. So now that I have it cut out, I have my inside leaf, but I also have this lovely stencil here of a leaf. And so I'm going to show how to use both of them to print. So if you have your stencil or your natural material, feel free to print along with me. We're going to start off by talking about our stencils. Now, because we're using acrylic paint, we need to work somewhat quickly because the paint dries quickly, which is a good thing, but also a not so good thing. So we have to kind of work at a fast pace. So go ahead before you start rolling your pigment onto your Gelli plate, decide what colors you want to do. I'm going to do blue to start with. So I'm just going to add that blueberry size, a large blueberry size dot on my plate, my paint plate. And with my brayer, I'm going to roll it across. I want to get a nice thin coat across my brayer, nice even thin coat. And so I'm just going to take my time and roll it. Now, again, you want to make sure you're getting a nice even coat, and it looks like I've got a nice coat on there now. So what I'm going to start off doing is showing how to do a stencil, like the outside stencil. So I'm just going to put this on my Gelli plate here. And then just very quickly with my brayer, roll it across. So when I peel it up, I have this really nice leaf, right? So what I can do with my paper is immediately press into it. Because it's wet, it transfers, right? You want to press firmly whenever you're putting that paper to your Gelli plate. And you want to make sure that you are pressing everywhere that pigment is. And that's how that pigment is going to get onto the paper, right? Because we're working on a small scale, we can use our fingers or the ball of our hand to do that smoothing and pressing. You can also use, I know some people have used like bottle caps, like larger bottle caps, that flat part to press. You can use, if you have another brayer, you can use that to press into it. Just anything to make sure that that paper is firmly pressed against that paint. And then you can pull it up. You can see we have a really nice leaf print here. Okay. So the next print, and this one, like my outside stencil, I'll be able to use it again. It didn't do any tearing. So once it dries, I can use this one again, which is really nice. So the next print I want to talk about is using that inside stencil. And so there are a couple ways to use that as well. So one of the things that you'll notice I have right here is I have a little pigment left on my Gelli plate. So we can easily clean that off and use it again. You can use like a wet wipe, like I am over and over again. Wet paper towel works. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it comes off pretty easily. Right? And then you can use it again. You want to make sure your plate is dry before you start adding that pigment though. So I'm going to come over to this other one and I'm going to use this as my stencil. So I'm going to do that blue again, add a little more blue to my paint tray. And with my brayer, just rub that across. And then I want to cover my Gelli plate. The one thing to remember when you're doing Gelli plate printing is that whatever shape your Gelli plate is, that's the shape that your print is going to be. So I'm just going to lay my stencil down and then take my paper and just go ahead and press that on top. And again, I'm just pressing firmly, right? I'm not pressing, like crushing it. I'm just making sure that I'm rubbing, pressing down every part that touches that pigment, every part of the paper that touches that pigment. Okay. And you'll be able to see, if you pull up an edge of it, you'll be able to see if that pigment is coming off or if you need to kind of press it a little more, right? A little further. So it looks like I've got some good paint transfer. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my piece off. Okay. And you can see that we have that little print there. So that's a couple ways to get a couple different types of prints, and that's just using the stencil. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this off now. Oh, and see this one tore, so it's not going to be good for using a second time. But that other stencil that I made, the outside stencil, will be useful over again. So again, I'm just going to clean my plate off. Let's talk about natural materials. So when you're using natural materials, like I said earlier, the fresher, the better. If you pick in advance, you want to either stick it in a little bit of water just so it stays a little fresher. So I'm going to print on this one now that it's dry. So I'm going to get some more blue. I'm still going to use the blue. Add just a little more. And I'm going to cover my jelly plate again. And we're wanting a smooth, even coat. We don't want something that's super thick. And I'm just going to press my leaf down. Right? I have my leaves on there. And with my paper, I'm just going to press it. And again, pressing firmly. We want to make sure that that paper is covering or touching, being pressed into each part of that pigment, right? And you especially want to press where those leaves are. Now you saw I put the leaves, the bottom of the leaves down, so they were facing up towards me. And it's because that vining, those veins and the stems that are under the leaf, at the bottom of the leaf, that's what we want to print. That's going to give us a really nice design. And so just taking my time, pressing it down, pressing it firmly, and even pressing where those leaves are. And I'll be able to see I have a good pull. Yeah. So you can see I have that print, my leaves here. But what I'm going to do is take off those leaves very carefully. Take off those leaves. So one of the things you may notice, and I'm going to lift it up here, you can see the leaves, those veins, the underside of the leaf left the patterning, right? Which is really nice. So because we're using the acrylic paint, it's drying. We're going to let it go ahead and dry because what we're going to do now is add a second color. So when you're wanting to add a second color, one of the things that you need to kind of remember is that first layer of color that we do, we want a thin coat of that, not a heavy application of paint. We want a thin layer. Once we press our leaves or whatever material into it and lift that up, we want that layer to dry completely before we add that second layer of paint. And the reason for that is if our paint, our first layer is still wet, that second layer will blend with it and you'll get a blurry image, which isn't necessarily bad. It can be a really nice, it can be a really nice print. But to get those distinct lines, we want to make sure that this is dry completely, right? And then when we put that second layer on, we can put a heavier layer, a heavier coat of that pigment. Right? Now, one of the things I also want to talk about now that we have this here is you can see when I picked up my paper, I had picked up my first print, you can see that there's not a lot of paint at the bottom. And just like I've shared in previous videos, that gives me some information. It could tell me two things. One, it could tell me I didn't have enough paint there, or three things actually. It could tell me I didn't have enough paint there and I need to add some more paint next time. It could mean that I didn't press that well enough for that transfer to happen. Or it could mean that it dried before I got my paper on. So there are a couple ways we can troubleshoot that. Adding more pigment, wicking faster, pressing harder, right? But you'll see here, and I'll pick it up again. You'll see I've got some pigment down here, that blue pigment down on the end. If I want that to stay on, I can leave it. But let's say I wanted something that was kind of like a little cleaner on the edges. One of the things that I can do with that is take my wet wipe or my wet paper towel and just kind of wipe it off a little bit, kind of clean it up. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? Super clean. But you can see it's kind of coming up. It's cleaning that plate for me. So if you pull up your paper and there's those little bits on there, you can pick that up. I like the way those look, and so I'm going to leave mine on, but you can see like it comes off pretty easily. Now I'm just gently touching my plate and I can see that it's pretty dry. So what I'm going to do is add my second layer now. And I'm going to use yellow. So for my second color, add that blueberry size dot, large blueberry size dot of paint. And then just with my brayer, roll it. Now for this coat, that remember that first layer we wanted super thin. So this second layer, we want it to be a little thicker. And what we're going to do once we put that pigment on there, we're going to put our paper on pretty quickly. That wet paint is going to pick up all the paint. So I've got my yellow, just rolling it across. And then I'm going to take my paper and press into it. And again, pressing firmly, making sure that I'm rubbing it well enough that each part of that pigment is touching my paper. One of the things that you'll notice is that that plate gives a little bit. So if you want to do something like a stick or twig or small berries or something like that, you can do that with this plate because it has a little bit of give. But the thing you want to be careful when you're doing that because you don't want to puncture your plate. If you puncture it, that's what's going to transfer when you do your other prints. And so again, I'm just kind of pressing firmly, making sure I'm touching every part. And I can take a little peek and see if it's pulling up. And it looks like I'm getting a good pull. Just testing. Okay. So once we pressed it in, excuse me, once we pressed it in, we can pull that paper up. And you can see my print has pulled up both layers of paint, that blue, so you can see the detail, and that yellow in the background. And so that's one way to add the two colors. So let's kind of move on to our magazine pages. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean my plate again, get it ready for the next one. When it comes to, well, actually, let's still talk about stencils for a little bit. So there are a couple other things that you can use for stencils. One of them is like found objects. So things like netting that comes on onions, bubble wrap, string, things like that that can provide texture. Maybe cardboard where you peel that top layer off and you have those corrugated edges. You can use that as a stencil. You can also use pre-made stencils. So for example, I have a couple pre-made stencils here, and I can use that to do some printing. So I'll show, for this one, I'll do it two different ways. I'll lay my stencil on first, and I'm going to add some blue to the top. And just very carefully roll that pigment across. So when I peel that stencil up, I have that pattern left. Now this is a great example, again, a really great example of cleaning the plate off. I have a little spillage, a little overflow here, and I can just take that wipe, that wet paper towel, and wipe it off. So I have a nice clean image. So I'm going to let this dry because I'm going to add a second color to this one. But I want to talk for a minute about another way we can use that stencil. So I'm going to add a little more blue. And again, we want that thin layer. So I'm just going to do a nice thin layer on the bottom of my plate. And then with my stencil, just press it in. Right, I'm going to take my paper and press firmly. Again, because that paint is wet, I want to make sure that I'm pressing every part. That stencil had a lot of detail in it, so I want to make sure I'm pressing it in each of those little pieces of detail. And then just pressing firmly, right? And you'll be able to see, again, if you need to press more, by just kind of peeking at it. All right. And then we can pull it up. And we have this nice print here. I'm going to lift my stencil up. And you'll notice that there is a nice pattern here. So once this dries, I can add a second layer to it. Okay. Get those out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and pull out some more paper because we've got a few more prints to talk about. Now, it won't take long if we're doing those thin layers. It won't take long for that paint to dry. You just want to carefully tap it. I think this one's already ready to go. So for that second layer, just like we did with those leaves, for that second layer, we want a thicker layer of paint. Again, that first layer, we wanted it thin, but this one we want thicker. So I'm going to add a little more yellow, my blueberry size scallop. And I'm just going to roll it across. And then with my paper, press into it. So you can see, like, already with these prints that we've done today in this video, you can see that there's so many ways to get prints out of just simple supplies. Creating your own stencils, using already made stencils, using found stencils, using natural materials, and you can really experiment with it. And as I said earlier, that's one of the things that I really, really enjoy about Gelli printing is because it really opens the door for experimentation. What else can I use to make a pattern or layer design? And these prints that we're making today are perfect for scrapbooking. They're perfect for card making. They're perfect for journaling and collage. And they're just like, they're a lot of fun to do. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this off. You can see that we have a nice print there. So we have that nice background color. We have that nice design in the center, which is really nice. Nice, nice, nice. All right. So I'm going to add the yellow for this one now. And I'm just going to, again, just roll it across that thicker layer and press my paper in. Again, pressing firmly, making sure that we're rubbing it so that every part of that paper is touching that pigment. You want to make sure you're getting good contact. And just like with the others, you can pull it up, peek at it, and see if you're getting, if you need to rub it more or harder. The Gelli plate is really forgiving, so it can take a lot of pressure. Then we have our nice pattern here. So that's a couple different ways to use pre-made stencils. I'm going to get that out of the way. I'm going to clean my plate. And you can see, like, you don't have to have a clean paper towel or wipe every time. Just using that same one over and over again will be perfect for this, cleaning it. So I want to talk just a little bit before we move on to the magazine prints. I want to talk just a little bit about a same color print. So one of my examples here is a patterned leaf inside a block of color. And you'll notice with, let me pull it out. You'll notice with the other leaves that we did that that's two colors here. So I want to talk about how to do that leaf with just one color. So what we're going to do, make it look like this. I'm going to pull my leaves back in here. And I've got my paper ready. So if you want to do something like that, it's not too complicated. So I'm going to add some blue, that blueberry sized out of blue. and do a nice solid layer across my jelly plate. Again, we want that first layer, we want it to be somewhat thin. Then I'm going to lay my leaves down and press into it with my paper. You're wanting to press, again, press firmly. And you want to make sure you're covering every space, right? Covering every part, especially where those leaves are, because you want that pattern, right? Okay. Yeah. So now what I'm going to do very carefully is I'm going to hold my hand on one side of that paper. You can also tape it down. That works as well. But I'm going to go ahead and lift up my paper pretty carefully and then very carefully pull those leaves off. So you can see that pattern is there, right? So now I haven't moved my hand. I'm just going to lay that paper back down and then press again, right where those leaves were. So when I pull it off, I have that leaf design in the center of my block of color. So that's another way to use that leaf material. So you're not just getting that natural material. So you can have like that two-tone where you're getting the two colors in there, but you can also do just one color as well, that solid block of color. So again, another way to use the natural material. There are a lot of really great options. So let's talk a little bit about using magazine pages. This one can be a lot of fun, but it can also be a little fickle. So there are a couple of things that I have found that really are kind of important when it comes to making those magazine prints, magazine transfers. So I have here a couple examples of some images that we can print today. When it comes to finding magazine pages, it's good to find an image that has high contrast, right? And so something like this where there's a darker color and a lighter color, this is good. Even this one is pretty good. But you want that high contrast. The higher the contrast, the more clean that print is going to be, right? You also want something that's on the really glossy paper. So the glossier the paper, the better the transfer, right? And then the next thing to kind of pay attention to is that you want a newer magazine. So a magazine that you've had for like a few years, that may work. It may be a little more fickle, but it may work. So you want a magazine that's kind of newer. They tend to work better. So I'm going to use these for my magazine pages today, but I wanted to show an example of what that kind of transfer can look like. So here, you can see I have a magazine image that was a lady working at a desk. And so I have my darker color that I did first. That first layer that we do is going to be is going to do those details, right? And so typically doing that darker color first is helpful. And I know that's kind of backwards thinking when it comes to like art making and painting. But when it comes to jelly printing, doing that darker color first will get you those dark details. And then you can do that lighter color on top, which gives you that background, right? And so you can see that here too. The darker color gave those details in the face and the body, and that lighter color kind of filled it in. Right? You can also do things where this one was just a magazine page of words that was torn at the end. And so this is really great background for a project that I'll do later on. You can also do other words too. This was a collage of images that I stuck on top of each other. So there's shapes, there's words, like all sorts of wonderful things that you can collage together to get images as well. Again, this is like the sky's the limit because it's so open to experimentation, right? We can try out a whole lot of things. Now, when it comes to the actual printing part, just like we did with the stencils and the leaves, we want a very thin first layer. And so I'm going to do a little bit of blue on here. Okay. I want a nice even coat, a nice thin layer. And so I'm just gonna roll that across. And then with my magazine page, just press it in, right? Now, again, we're wanting the glossier image. We're wanting a newer magazine, a newer image, and we're wanting something that's high contrast. And you'll be able to see when you pull it up. Yeah, I've got some image that's showing the coffee pot or the coffee cup, the paper, the notebook, and a little bit of that plant. You don't want to leave it on there to dry. You want to just press it a little bit and gradually like peel it up. Now, troubleshooting. You may find that when you're pressing your magazine page in and you peel it up, that there's absolutely no pigment that's left. And so what that means is that the layer of paint was too thick. So you need a thinner layer. You saw for mine, I didn't leave that magazine paper on there long. I just did a quick like press into it and then peeled it off. And so I've got nice lines that are showing up here. Now, again, we want that thin layer and we want that first layer, that thin layer to dry before we put that second layer on. Okay. And so while it's doing that, while it's drying, we'll talk a little bit about cleaning and caring for our gel plate. Now, this one is a temporary one, right? This is the recipe that we made ourselves. So this plate will last, it can last a couple weeks at the most, if you care for it. Clean it and keep it in the fridge. For mine, I clean it with my wet wipe or my paper towel, wet paper towel, and then I'll wrap it in saran wrap and stick it in the fridge. And when I'm ready to print, I'll pull it out. The thing to remember though is that you want it to get to room temperature before you start printing. If there's condensation on your plate, if it's sweating a little bit, you want that water off, that wetness off before you put the paint on there. It's not going to react well to it when you're doing that printing part. Yep. So I've got this image here that's drying. We're going to let it dry for a little bit. One of the things one of the great things that I want to talk about, another way to print is using something like pastels. So if you have some oil pastels, you can make your own designs, right? And so I'm going to pull out this piece of a magazine here, and let me move this plate for just a moment. And I'll show what we can do with that. So I'm just like really quickly, just going to draw a leaf. So when you're using like an oil pastel, it acts as a wax resist. And so it'll leave a pattern, right? It'll leave a design in the printing. So if you want to draw your own stencil, draw your own design, you can use that oil pastel for it. So I'm just kind of coloring in my design here. All right. So what I'm going to do is add a layer of paint to my Gelli plate. Right? And again, that first layer that we're doing, we always want that to be thin, that thin first layer. Okay. And so I'm going to take my design, my oil pastel, and press it in. You can see as I peel it up, well, I got some of the magazine image on there too, but I got my drawing on there. So let's pull this up. So I have my leaf here, but you can also see that magazine page left a building and a man and some words too. One of the interesting things about using magazine pages is that those words transfer. When we were making other things like a collagraph or relief print, we have to use like our letters, we have to do the mirror image of them so they print correctly. But when you're using those magazine pages, you don't have to worry about that. It'll print. We're like cutting out a step when it comes to printing those words, right? So let's test. It looks like my plate is dry, so I'm going to add my layer of yellow. And again, for the second layer, you want to make sure you're doing a nice thicker, like a thicker coat, not super thick, but a thicker coat of pigment. So for my magazine page, I'm just going to add that pigment, my second layer of paint, and then with my paper, press into it. Now, sometimes with Gelli plates, it takes a couple tries to kind of get the feel for it. So if you are wanting a specific magazine image, once you use it one time to print, you won't be able to use that image again to print. And so a way around that is to use a photocopy. So you can use a photocopy of it, a high contrast photocopy, and use that image over again. Another way to get that same image. Yeah. Yay. I think I've got pressed down. So I'm going to go ahead and peel this one up. And you can see my image here. You can see the iPad, the coffee cup, the notebook, a little bit of that plant. But it's a really nice transfer, right? It's a really fun transfer. And that's a magazine page. So this is really good, again, for things like collage or a background for a card, or there's a lot of things we can do with a piece like this. Not that long ago, I used some of these, excuse me, some of these prints for like a book cover in a bookbinding group. So there are lots of ways we can use it, which is kind of nice. Again, doing Gelli plates really opens the door for experimentation, trying out all these different designs, patterns, images, and finding what really works for us. I like using natural materials in a lot of my art making, and so I always have fun when I get to bring that into a printing process. All right. All right. So I'm going to print this next one now because it looks like it's mostly dry. And again, we want a thicker layer across this. And then with our paper, press into it. And again, pressing firmly. And making sure that every part of the paper is pressed into where that pigment is. And you'll be able to do kind of a little peek to make sure pieces are getting pressed in well enough. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's nice. You can see that magazine page, the buildings showed up well, but you can see my my leaf as well. My leaf turned out. So that's another way to use this. Actually, this turned out really nicely with the magazine page in the background and the leaf drawing. It's probably my favorite of the video today. But those are just a few ways to use your Gelli plate. There are many, many other ways to use a Gelli plate, to make prints off a Gelli plate. And again, experiment with it. Try it out. See what all you can use as a pattern to make a design. If there's like drawings you want to do, photocopies, magazine pages, you can do it for collage. Like again, like the possibilities are endless with all the things that you can do with the Gelli plate printing. All right. Well, I hope you enjoy your printing process. I know this is one of my favorite